Okay, I don't know why it cut me off, but part two of World War II, chapter 25. So we said cash and carry was first, CC. Later in the war, Battle of Britain has started. We moved to Lend-Lease. So now they recognize Britain can't pay cash and they can't carry weapons on their own ships. So the US becomes this arsenal of democracy. And the slogan was send guns, not sons. If we send weapons now, maybe we won't have to send troops later. Roosevelt compares this to the garden hose, that if your neighbor's house is on fire, you're not just going to sit there and watch it burn. Like you're going to lend them your garden hose so that they can put out the fire and it doesn't spread across the yard to your house. So in that analogy, Hitler is the fire and we need to put it out over there so that it doesn't come over here. It is controversial because it is technically an economic declaration of war, even though we're technically still neutral. It's not at that point. It does increase industrial production. We said this is what really pulls us out of the Depression. Meanwhile, Hitler recognizes that the US is no longer neutral, sinks a US merchant ship that has nothing to do with the war because he's just a jerk like that. So at this point, the US is really involved, even though it hasn't officially joined the war. Surprise, surprise, Hitler stabs Stalin in the back, so their non-aggression pact is broken. He got what he wanted out of that, and then he launches an invasion of the Soviet Union. So it starts in June, but it goes into the winter. And some of the battles, Stalingrad, places like that, the death toll is just staggering. If you remember studying Napoleon, it is not a good idea to be invading Russia, Soviet Union, in the wintertime. And that's what ends up happening in a lot of these places. The Americans send $1 billion with a B dollars in Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union, who are technically our allies at this point, but as soon as the war is over, that $1 billion of weapons and materials are now belong to our enemy, because once the Cold War starts, we're no longer allies. This Atlantic Charter, that's what I was talking about, where Roosevelt and Churchill meet. They create these joint war goals. They talk about their plan for what will become known as the United Nations, kind of that second version of the League of Nations that will happen after World War II. This angers isolationists. They're like, why is our president on a boat meeting with the leader of a warring nation if we're neutral? Well, the answer to that is we're not neutral. That if you still think we are at this point, they're just in denial. Like the writing is on the wall. We are getting involved in this. So the first Americans really involved in the war itself are these convoys, these shipments traveling across the Atlantic, called the Battle of the Atlantic, where they have shootouts with German submarines, similar to what we saw in World War I. So we altered the Neutrality Act, which said you could not arm merchant ships. Well, now if we don't arm them, they're just sitting ducks, like they're gonna get sunk. So they start arming the merchant ships so that they can fight back, potentially get rid of these submarines before they sink the Lend-Lease shipments that are trying to go to Britain. So again, another step closer to war here. So the final straw, so if you had a question about the causes of American involvement in World War II, all of this that we talked about, yes. The final straw is Pearl Harbor, and you know that. So these embargoes on Japan, America stops sending these oil shipments. We know an attack is coming. They just don't know where. And the reason for this is they want access, the Japanese want access to the oil in the Indies, West Indies. And the American fleets at Pearl Harbor, they're like the only ones who would be in a place to challenge them or stop them. So that's why they want to get rid of the fleet. So December 7th, 1941, luckily 3 of the major aircraft carriers were not in the harbor, or they would have been completely destroyed. After this attack, America declares war on Japan because of the Tripartite Pact. That's also a war on Germany and Italy. So because we've declared on their ally, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. Roosevelt gives his very famous Pearl Harbor address. I thought this was really neat. This was his speech with FDR's handwritten notes on it. And probably the most famous line of his ever was yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. And you can see here on this top part, the original wording says world history, and he changed it himself before he gave the address to live in infamy. which I think is much stronger way to say it anyway. It's just crazy to see a document with his handwritten notes that could have been much different. So it's go time. Even the staunchest isolationists are like, okay, we have no choice. So we're going to war. It's the last straw in this long series of events. So it's go time. We ride. In Europe, so there are two fronts of this war. I wish we could spend more time talking about all the different battles and campaigns. And I know if you're a military history person, you would love that too. We can't, unfortunately. So war in Europe, if you're looking at a map, the Soviets, Stalin, are struggling. They want their allies, Britain, US, France, to open a second front in Western Europe. The Allies, America and Britain, are stalling. So they're stalling on Stalin because the idea of he and the Germans killing each other, taking each other out, really both of the major threats to democracy, taking each other out, does not sound like a bad idea. So it was kind of purposeful stalling on opening that second front. Eventually, that second front is going to come in France at Normandy. It's called D-Day. It's actually on my birthday. It's on June 6th. This is where massive Allied invasion led by future President Dwight Eisenhower that is going to turn the tide of the war. So they invade France. The Americans and British are working their way from the west. The Soviets start pushing back from the east, where they close in on Germany. So VE Day is the name given to Victory in Europe Day. This is also where the camps, there's the D-Day picture. These camps that really the extent of which had not been fully known up until this point are being liberated. Like as the Soviets are pushing through Poland, they are discovering what had been happening and the extent of the Holocaust and just how horrific it really was. So VE Day is this huge celebration. However, there is still a war going on. So victory in Europe is done. Hitler commits suicide. Germany surrenders, but we are still fighting Japan in the Pacific. This is one of the saddest things ever to me, like just sad, that Hitler outlived Roosevelt by 18 days. Roosevelt dies April 12th of 1945. Hitler died April 30th of 1945. So he did not live to see the end of the war or the end of Hitler, which just feels wrong that that should not have happened. So when Roosevelt dies, his vice president is Harry Truman. He will be the one who makes the decision to drop the atomic bombs that's going to end the war in Japan. So this is at the Yalta conference. It's his very last conference. It's in February before he died in April. And it's the last meeting between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin there. So in the Pacific, they call it island hopping. So the goal here is to hop on these islands from island to island, take it back from Japan toward the Japanese mainland. The general in the Pacific is Douglas MacArthur, who we will see again in the Cold War with Korea, who has ties to Arkansas, actually. Major battles in the Pacific: Midway, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. I'm sure you've seen the picture, the planting of the flag at Iwo Jima. Manhattan Project, that is the name for the project to build the atomic bomb. If you haven't seen the movie Oppenheimer, it's really good and hits on all the stuff from this time period. There's the picture I was talking about, planting the flag at Iwo Jima. So the bombs are dropped on Hiroshima, Nagasaki, a few days apart. After Nagasaki, Japan surrenders. We call that VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, and the war is officially over at that point. Once the war is over, there's only a short sigh of relief because chapter 26, you will read about the coming Cold War. So the Soviets and the Americans, who had been allies all through World War II, are going to grow apart. And we'll have a decades-long struggle between communism and democracy. So I will stop there. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope you enjoy this video.